Hey, Chris. So anyway, so you're an eye surgeon, you're an ophthalmologist. When I went to medical school, that was probably the least thing I learned about. I mean, it was like you got, eyeballs, and there's some weird, letters for how you describe things. I mean, literally, I think I had less exposure to ophthalmology than I had to, nutrition, which is kind of, you think about it.
Yeah.
I got exposed to a lot of stuff during medical school, but ophthalmology was not one of them. I didn't do a rotation in that. And so really it was just like, oh, those are the guys who are doing cataract surgeries all day long, every day. But so that's, can you tell me a little bit more about your background? Because that's the extent of what I know about ophthalmology. I'll say that's what I know about ophthalmology, nothing. So anyway.
Now, are we recording now?
We are recording.
Oh, all right, Shawn. So my background, So I went to the University of Colorado School of Medicine, 1986 to 1990. So I graduated in 90. Did a transitional internship in Denver at two hospitals, Denver Presbyterian and St. Luke's, and then for that year, and then I did a 3-year ophthalmology residency, also at Denver, University of Colorado's Health Sciences Center. And then I went into practice. And so I actually practiced ophthalmology for 21 years before I started. I had started digging into nutrition, Shawn, like about 2011, very, very deeply. And I developed this hypothesis that age-related macular degeneration was driven by processed foods. And this had never been hypothesized before. So anyway, but when I was convinced that hypothesis held water, Shawn, I left practice in February of 2015 and began to pursue that full time. And eventually, in 2016, I went public with this, started speaking, and published a book. And then eventually we published a paper in the journal Medical Hypotheses in November of 2017 that proffered that hypothesis and showed our supportive data. And then I developed around that same time, I developed a nonprofit foundation, Cure AMD Foundation, in this regard. And so this is kind of what I've been doing ever since. But as you may know, my research has gotten really broad. So I started really broad, looking at westernized diets driving all of this chronic disease, heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, overweight, autoimmune disease, all of this, before I ever began to I never even questioned the possibility that macular degeneration might be driven by the same thing until I understood the big picture. And so anyway, so that was actually when I, thought about the possibility that westernized diets might be driving age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. That was 2013. It was late 2013. And so anyway, so my focus kind of has been on that, and a lot of people, have focused on that. But as you may know, I've really gotten broad, and I made such a strong connection to the seed oils as being the major driver of all of this chronic disease, is what I now see and now believe, so kind of that's where there's been a lot broader interest in what I do.
Yeah, I want to get into that. I want to, just because, I want to at least focus a little bit on the eye stuff, because, that's obviously, you're going to have more knowledge than 99.99% of the people in the world on the eyes. So first of all, I guess we could rename age-related macular degeneration to diet-related macular degeneration, would probably be more appropriate. But what is macular degeneration for those that don't really understand that? What's going on, and why do you think diet is causing it? What evidence do you have, and is there any evidence that fixing diet can perhaps mitigate this?
Yeah, great question. So number one, the macula is just the central retina. So when you look at something, when I look at your face, your image is landing on my macula, the very central retina, which accounts for about our central 10 degrees of vision. And unfortunately, that is the part of the eye that tends to degenerate the most. I mean, for ophthalmologists, you know, our kind of the things we see every day, day in and day out, you know, seems to be, but mostly macular degeneration, glaucoma, and cataract. I mean, if you want to pick the big three. And so anyway, but so when you have degeneration of the macula, you begin to lose central vision. And so, but this can get to be in the moderate stages before you have any symptoms. So the problem for people is that they could have moderately advanced macular degeneration and they think they're okay because they're seeing okay. Maybe they're having some trouble with night vision, maybe a little trouble driving, but you know, they just think, well, I'm not 22 anymore. And so then if they're not being evaluated by their ophthalmologist or optometrist, they may just think all is well. And then all of a sudden one day, Shawn, their vision starts to plummet in one eye. And by that point, they may have very advanced, you know, what's called wet macular degeneration. So the dry stage is where you have, it's characterized by drusen, these metabolic deposits. But what's going on in the macula is actually that you're getting degeneration of the photoreceptors, the rods and cones, and you're getting degeneration or loss, atrophy, I really should say, of the retinal pigment epithelium that supports those photoreceptors, and neither of those is regenerative. So once you develop that, whatever you've lost, it's gone for good. And this is the whole reason that we need to evaluate and discover this as early as possible, and again, try to prevent the disease. But, and now to get to your question about, well, what, you know, how is diet driving this? You know, Shawn, I mean, it's obviously the perfect question, but I want to tell you that there's really, you know, probably at least 30,000 scientific papers that have been published in the last 3 or 4 decades that try to answer that very question. And it is extraordinarily complex to try to summarize, but in essence, what I'll tell you is that the main things are, it goes back to the same thing that I see driving all of this chronic disease, and it's nutrient deficiency and the toxicity. And the nutrient deficiency comes from the fact that 75% of the world's diet now is, as you know, man-made processed food, which carries virtually no nutrients, virtually almost no vitamins and no minerals. And then secondly, you have toxicity that's coming primarily from seed oils and trans fats. And those are essentially, they are pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, directly toxic to cells, and nutrient deficiency. So none of the oils, none of them, have any fat soluble vitamins. They don't have A, D, and K2. Okay, they'll have some E. The vegetable oils will have some E and they'll have some K1, but they don't have any vitamins A, D, or K2 like butter, lard, and beef tallow. And so in our westernized diet, as over the last 150 years approximately, since 1866, what's happened is we've gradually supplanted the animal fats, lard, butter, and beef tallow with vegetable oils. That's what's happened. And we've almost removed animal fats because they've been vilified, as you know. And but even when people don't believe in that or even recognize that, if they're consuming processed foods, they're getting a boatload of seed oils. But let me back up just a second, Shawn, and just say that to your audience that westernized diets or processed foods is really 4 things. It's added sugars, refined flours, mostly wheat flour, refined white wheat flour, seed oils, or what most people would call vegetable oils, and trans fats. And those four things represent processed food. And as of 2009, our own USDA shows that 63% of the American diet is made up of those four foods. And you really could call those ultra processed foods. And then processed foods, which means that even the other natural foods have been manipulated, processed, and are deficient or abnormal in some way as compared to their native state. So I hope that answers the question in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, it's, clearly, if anything, we can argue about what our natural human diet was going back, however many far back you want to go, 1,000 years, 50,000 years, a million years, depending on what you believe. But certainly the seed oils were not part of that. I mean, they just came into existence a little over 100 years ago. So they're not native to our diet. So clearly that argument certainly makes sense just from a common sense standpoint. This is something, and you talked about the big three, the glaucoma, the cataracts, and then the macular degeneration. And I see, and there's somebody in here asking about retinitis pigmentosa as being a problem, but I see people telling me my glaucoma got better, my vision got better, my cataracts shrunk by changing diet. Is that credible? Is that something you think could happen or believe? Or have you seen that? Because that's what I'm hearing that. I have a hard time saying, no, it's impossible, and you're imagining things. Is there a possibility, and what's the mechanism by so if it does?
Well, each one independently. So as far as cataracts go, which is an opacification in the natural lens of the eye, there's no question that, for example, people who smoke and people who have diabetes, type 2, which most of that is type 2 diabetes, 95% roughly, they definitely tend to get cataracts earlier. And so I would say with respect to cataracts, a pro-oxidative state, which is primarily what smoking does, is driving cataracts at an earlier stage, no question. But people on ancestral diets still get cataracts. And so I really think that you may not be able to eliminate cataracts, you use following an ancestral diet. Glaucoma, it's, I hesitate in making any connection whatsoever to between glaucoma and cataract, and westernized diets, because this is not an area that I've researched. And one of my really good friends is a glaucoma specialist. He read my book, and for example, he said, I really think this is probably the main driver of glaucoma as well. And he says, so now he's talking to all of his patients about their diet when they have glaucoma. And, but I mean, as far as researching that is such a massive topic, just like trying to connect processed foods to macular degeneration. I mean, it literally would take years of study, just like it did me with macular degeneration before I ever went public with this. So I hesitate making a strong connection, but I'll just say this: open angle glaucoma and and low tension or normal pressure glaucoma, there is great reasons to believe that they are driven in part by vascular disease. And so if you're developing atherosclerotic disease in the vessels that are bringing blood to the eye, no question that's a part of it. And there are papers that make many papers that have made that connection in general.
Yeah. So, I guess basically you said you've in-depthly looked at macular degeneration. Some of these other things may or may not be related to that. You don't have the data that show, because I've got a lot of people asking about dry eyes, meibomian gland dysfunction, retinitis pigmentosa. And so all those things you would say, we don't know yet. It could be, perhaps, would that be a fair statement?
Well, as far as, I'm really cautious about making any, blanket statements about those. I will say that I think there's also a really strong connection between processed foods and dry eyes, primarily because those people consuming westernized diets are broadly they tend to be very vitamin A and D deficient, and vitamin A is really extremely critical to tear production. And the first things that happen when people have vitamin A deficiency is they develop night blindness or night vision trouble, even when they don't recognize it, but it can be tested for. And the second thing, is, from an ophthalmic standpoint, is dry eyes. They have decreased tear production. And yet nobody talks about this in conventional ophthalmology. It's just, there's, as usual, there's drugs and artificial tears for dry eye sufferers primarily, and that's it. There's never any consideration that diet is a part of that.
Yeah, and that's why we've always been told to eat all those carrots, right? Carrots are good for your eyes, but I mean, the vitamin A in carrots obviously coming from beta carotene versus perhaps the retinol types that we need that aren't the same really. So can we get the vitamin A efficiently from eating carrots or whatever vitamin A containing vegetables, carotenoids, I suppose?
So yes and no. It depends on there's great bioindividuality there. So in general, people who are depending on fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, for example, to get their vitamin A, as you probably know, they are at serious risk to not be able to convert enough of those carotenoids to vitamin A. So let me back up and say that there is no vitamin A, which is retinol, in any plant food whatsoever. So when you walk through the grocery store and you're walking through the produce and you see all these signs that they show a leafy green or something, or carrots, and it says good source of vitamin A, that the USDA allows them to make that statement because there is conversion of carotenoids like beta carotene, alpha carotene, beta cryptoxanthin, and there's approximately 60 carotenoids that have the ability to convert to vitamin A. But the problem is the conversion is extremely inefficient. And overall, around 4% of the carotenoids, all comers, are being converted to vitamin A. So if you're very, very dependent on getting your vitamin A from fruits and vegetables, then you are at major risk for vitamin A deficiency, because roughly 1 in 24 to 1 in 30 molecules of beta carotene will actually be converted to active vitamin A, which is retinol. So now, about 25% of people are very good at that. They can convert really well. Another 25% are moderate, and and then about half are not very good converters, and some are extremely poor converters. And if you have gut microbiome issues, for example, your conversion may be almost zero. So when they try to give these, these children in third world countries, they're trying to get them vitamin A through carotenoids, it may not work at all. They may not get any actual retinol or vitamin A from that, because they're not capable genetically and physiologically to convert the carotenoids to retinol.
Yeah, there was a study published just recently. You may or may not have seen it. I think it came out of Finland, looking at plant-based kids, vegan children, and showing that they had significant issues with vitamin D, vitamin A deficiency. Not even outside of being able to supplement, they had changes in their metabolic systems, where they couldn't, their bile secretion was changed, and everything was changed completely, to where not even if you supplemented them would it help them. So there's somebody asking about, and I'm not sure, I couldn't tell you what this is, Fuchs dystrophy. If there any commentary on that, does that have a cause? It's other than, I don't even know what it is. So
I don't know if they're talking about Fuchs corneal dystrophy, and the answer, if it's that, no. I'm going to say no.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about, so this Western diet is affecting, you started with the eye and like I said, I started seeing stuff with the joints. I mean, I was like floored when I started see people on the OR schedule for knee replacements walking in, a few months after being on a ketogenic diet saying, "Hey doc, my knee doesn't hurt anymore." And you look at their x-ray and you're like, I've seen people with a lot less looking x-rays that hurt a whole lot more than you do. So there's something going on across the body. So where did you start to find out the sort of the big picture? What kind of big picture stuff did you see?
Well, so, Sean, the only reason I'm really in this space, this field at all, is because of my own suffering with arthritis. That's where it started. And for me, it started when I was about 34 years old. And Sean, I went to family doctors, internists, I went to orthopedic surgeons. I went to 2 rheumatologists, and all I ever got was medicines and injections like steroids and such, but really none of it ever helped me. And it was eventually when I started a partial paleo diet in 2011 that my arthritis improved dramatically in about 8 or 10 days. And this just was life-changing for me. And so I went down this path, actually the next thing I did was just shortly after that, because I didn't know anything about paleo. This was early 2011. And I read Lauren Cordain's book, The Paleo Answer, and started, and he made all these connections between processed foods and all of this disease. But there was things about Cordain's thesis and his work that didn't make sense to me. For example, that he rather maybe slightly vilified saturated fat and would believe that our ancestors consumed very low saturated fat diets, things like that. And so I didn't really buy that, knowing especially the history of the Maasai, who would consume enormous amounts of saturated fat, like 66% of their diet coming from animal fat, and yet they were extraordinarily healthy. So I basically kept looking, I kept searching, I was studying for 2 years before I came across the work of Weston A. Price. And as you know, so Price was a scientist and a researcher who in the 1930s evaluated people on 5 continents, 14 nations, hundreds of tribes and villages, who were both on their native traditional diets and had westernized their diet or were in the process of westernizing their diet. And what Price noted was, of course, that people on native traditional diets were extraordinarily healthy. They had almost perfect, naturally straight, beautiful teeth, more than 99% cavity free. They were free from heart disease, cancers, overweight, arthritis. And as they westernized their diet, which Price referred to that as he called those foods modernized foods, or he called them the displacing foods of modern commerce. And he defined those as refined or added sugars, refined flours, canned goods, sweets, confectionery, and vegetable fats. He called vegetable oils vegetable fats, which I think was the normal term back then. But when people began to consume those, they began to develop all of this degenerative disease. And it began with dental decay and in the children, dental deformities. And then it was followed by arthritis and soon cancers and loss of immunity to infectious diseases like tuberculosis. And those people had immunity to all of those conditions on their native traditional diets. But as they westernized, they lost that immunity to all of those conditions. And so this set the stage for me, Sean, to understand the big picture. And this is the cohesive idea, formulation that drives everything that I understand today. Everything that I look at I still see it through the lens of what Price discovered back in the 1930s. And everywhere I look, it seems to work. Now, Price couldn't understand, there was no research or data that could connect seed oils, high omega-6. They couldn't even analyze dietary fatty acids back in that era, but he knew that all those foods, those westernized foods, were nutrient deficient. There wasn't any way for him to understand the toxicity, the fact that they're pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, they're directly toxic. He couldn't have known that. There was no science that could have proved that back in the 1930s or even the 1940s. It wasn't really until 1952 that the gas chromatography, which is followed by high performance liquid chromatography, could start analyzing these fats to break them down and understand the different fatty acids and how that all comes to play.
Yeah, I know I've seen data on like human fat biopsies, and we've seen it,
Yes.
compared to decades ago, we're accumulating more and more of these, oxidized, damaged omega-6 fats, likely derived from ingestion of seed oils. I just have a question. It's interesting because you point about immunity. Obviously, currently today, the immune system's a hot topic because we're dealing with this global pandemic, and like myself and many others saying, hey, why don't we work on host factors, and not just keep pounding just the mitigating factors. Let's strengthen the host, maybe improve the diet, some metabolic health. But, and so that's an easy argument to make. But then I say, well, there was a Black Plague in the Middle Ages. People weren't eating ultra processed westernized diets back then. So still, you've got to say there's things that are so virulent that they can definitely do that. But when you got something that's perhaps like, I'm being exposed to likely millions of viruses right now as I'm sitting here, and I'm not succumbing to any of them. So, we have this immune system that's supposed to work. When you say, the Weston A. Price stuff is interesting. I've interviewed Sally Found, in fact, she's coming on again to chat, I guess, about some other stuff. But have you found that the receptivity to your ideas has been met reasonably well within the ophthalmology community, or are you kind of the guy that's crazy? And what's the response been?
Okay, yeah. Oh, I love that you asked me this. Well, I love it. I hate it, Sean, because in early 2016, when we started getting our data, and we looked at data, processed food consumption, tracking sugar and seed oils as proxy markers for processed food. We tracked those in 25 nations, and we developed graphs for all of that in relation to the prevalence of macular degeneration. And what we see at every single nation, what you see is the more processed food they have, as demonstrated by their increasing consumption of sugar and seed oils, the more macular degeneration they have. And they would go from extraordinarily low levels, even like the United States and Japan and just on, to extraordinarily high levels in a matter of a few decades. And so when in 2016, mid 2016, I published this in a book, and then I presented this at the Ancestral Health Symposium 2016. And honestly, I thought within a year I would be on stages in huge ophthalmology conventions, American Academy of Ophthalmology, and on. And, I started submitting abstracts in attempt to present this, and all of the major ophthalmology organizations have turned us down. Every single one, except for the Christian Ophthalmology Society, that allowed me to present to their at their annual convention in the summer of 2018, but all the others have turned us down. Now, let me just tell you, as far as the reception, it seems like, the lay public, they get it like that. They understand it and they accept this. The physicians, as you know, in general, I don't know, I think that but the majority of them, they ignore this. And this is the stage that we're in ophthalmology, is they have ignored it. And let me tell you that since our scientific paper that was published in Medical Hypotheses that introduced this hypothesis and supported it with data in 25 nations. Since then, I have, I think it's 9 or 10 ophthalmologists who are on my team as co-authors for research moving forward. These, a number of these are academics. We have 3 very highly academically trained retina specialists. We have a PhD vision scientist. We've got, I think, 6 ophthalmologists. So my team that is moving forward with the science has grown considerably. And I would say, I probably know of at least a few dozen ophthalmologists that accept this and endorse this hypothesis and believe this, but we still haven't been on any stages. And I got so tired of working on abstracts to try to present this. I've practically given up. I shouldn't, but it's just a lot of work, as you know, and we submitted collectively. I think there was 7 of us, me and, 6 or 7 co-authors submitted an abstract in early 2020, for example, for me to try to present this at the American Academy of Ophthalmology's annual meeting, which would have been this last October or November. And once again, even with me and 6 or 7 highly trained ophthalmologists and retina specialist co-authors, they turned us down. This would have been a 7-minute presentation at the American Academy of Ophthalmology, which of course it ended up being a virtual event, but nevertheless, we're still turned down in 2020. I mean, it's with all these co-authors. So no, they really don't want to hear this.
Well, I mean, if you look at many of these big medical conferences, they're underwritten by pharmaceutical companies. I mean, they sponsor it, they have booths everywhere. I mean, they help pay for, defray the cost. So, you have to look at it with a little bit of a cynical eye when it comes to that thing. But back to this, one of the things I'd say, because you show this nice relationship, and the devil's advocates say, well, that's nice, there's a relationship, that's a hypothesis. Now, how do we prove it? And it's hard to say, we're going to put these people on a processed junk food diet and check their eyes every year for a couple of years and see if they develop, AMD. Is that even ethical? Can you even do that study? And then the question is, can you show that there's a difference? And maybe that needs to be done. I mean, I saw recently that there's actually companies paying people money to sit home, eat junk food, and watch Netflix and review movies. And I mean, these are private companies. There's probably not an IRB board. There's not it's not going to get published in a journal. But there's people that are willing to do this stuff. And like you, I think, although it's kind of interesting, I've got somebody from the American Academy of Orthopedics asking me potentially to talk, which I think is a huge vindication, but whether that comes through or not, I don't know. But I mean, I think, you're right. I mean, the average person, the lay person that doesn't get, a paycheck from Pfizer or GlaxoSmith or whatever, just wants their eyes to stop being messed up or wants their joints to stop hurting. And so, I mean, I think this is kind of what we have to, I'm kind of saying, there's an industry and it's pretty locked in, and they're inextricably intertwined with big pharma, and they're never going to get rid of that. It's never going to go away. And so you can either try to fight within the system, and I think good luck. My hat's off to you if you want to do that, or you make your own and you kind of make your own market. And I think that's what we end up having to do, quite honestly. And so I think, and the people will go where the results are. And so if you're out there, having people with improved vision better than the standard of care, I mean, I don't think it takes long for people to figure it out. It's just, navigating getting that message out. That's the hardest part. It's not that the message is wrong. It's just getting it out there and getting it to the people that need to hear it. And it is a tough battle. I do it every day, and I'm sure you do too. And sometimes it wears you out, but what else are you going to do? Once you see it, like you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And, it's just like, you're kind of like portrayed as a guy in the street, with the world is ending tomorrow sign, walking around. Yeah. I think you're kind of crazy, but you just live it. And, like I said, I'm living it. I walk the walk every day, and I live what I'm doing. I'm like, look, here I am, not dead. So it's despite eating, ridiculous amounts of saturated fat and red meat every single day. And, here I am still thriving at, my mid 50s. But, so what else is interesting that you think we ought to address?
Well, I want to go back to what you said about, can we, this is the thing is, so orthodox allopathic medicine to me, Sean, has become so ingrained in the idea that we have to have a randomized controlled clinical trial to prove this. And you can say, okay, look, all this data, these population studies, they're just correlative data. And, if we go back to, Weston Price's work, I mean, even by the 1920s, by 1930, he already understood that Americans had already westernized their diet so extensively that he couldn't find what he called suitable controls at home. That's why he left the United States, right, and traveled all over the world and spent about 6 or 7 years traveling to find these people who were in nature's laboratory, I think is how he called it, that were consuming their native traditional diets and had been, for their whole lives, really, to compare those to, the people that had westernized. And so, my point really is that if we look at these diseases like, heart disease, stroke, macular degeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, these don't develop in people that are 25, 30 years old, hardly ever. In other words, the point is, so in this world today, almost every kid in the United States is born, and within days, weeks, or months, they're consuming a processed food-laden diet. But they're not having a heart attack till they're at least 40. And they're not developing macular degeneration until they're at least 40. And they're not developing Alzheimer's until they're 60 plus. And the point is all these diseases have most of these chronic diseases, they have a very long incubation period. And for those who don't understand that, the incubation period is the time you're exposed to the noxious agent. Like you could say, well, a cold virus, you're exposed to it 3 or 4 days later. If you're going to get the infection, you come down with the infection. The incubation period is 3 or 4 days. But in heart disease, coronary heart disease and, strokes and macular degeneration and Alzheimer's disease, that incubation period is decades. So you're never going to have a randomized controlled clinical trial for the most part that's ever going to prove this. In my way of thinking, the longest studies we've ever had that tried to do this was like the LA American Veterans Trial with heart disease. It lasted 8 years, and most of the subjects in that trial were coming in, going out. They were there for an average of 1.5 years. I think that was the typical. And as far as entirely controlling diets, the only way to do that is to put people in a metabolic ward, and they're basically like prisoners of the hospital system, the metabolic ward. Everything that they eat, consume is prepared in the metabolic kitchen. They track everything they consume. And the longest that this has ever been done, to my knowledge, is about 6 months, and with really small number of people, like 20. So you can't take populations and control their diets. It's absolutely impossible. Never will happen. Sure, you can tell them to try to consume less seed oils or consume mostly all saturated fat, but I saw you present about the evidence for these food frequency questionnaires, which is pathetic. I mean, it's terrible when people try to report what they're eating. And so anyway, I think we need to rely heavily on these population studies where we look at what people have done their whole lives compared to, those of us like our nation where almost everybody has westernized their diet. There you got good comparisons.
Yeah, I want to just on the point of processing, we had a fellow named by Gabora Droshi. I thought very insightful stuff. And I think about what am I able to do as far as processing when I have to process my food given sort of natural means? I mean, I can chew things to a certain size, but there's no way I can powder my food. I can't do that. I mean, right. And some people would argue maybe you couldn't cook it, but I think that's something that's a skill we've had for at least hundreds of thousands of years. So, I mean, the modern processing, does put you at this exposure in the GI tract of these nutrients, dense energy products that we would have never been able to be exposed to, whether it is seed oils. I mean, clearly I could not turn a a piece of corn into oil with my teeth. I mean, this doesn't happen. I mean, you need all this high-powered machine and pressure and heat and craziness to do that. Somebody's asking about, I guess, I didn't see this talk, but apparently you'd mentioned, like, if a kid's eating French fries, he's literally, quote unquote, poisoned himself for many years to come. Can you expand upon that? What is the context of that statement? If you did make that, I assume you did. I don't know.
Yes, I did. They're getting that from the Ancestral Health Symposium 2019 presentation I did, Sean. And that research comes from a lipid researcher who is extraordinary by the name of Martin Grootveld. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Grootveld. He's in the UK, and he's done lipid research. He's a biochemist, organic chemist that's been doing lipid research since the 90s. And what he has done is he has shown, for example, that these seed oils, that if you pull them out of these, especially these fryers at fast food restaurants, for example, that, repeatedly heat and fry their foods in these oils for like days or up to maybe a week or so at a time, that what they find in those is what the lipid chemists call, they'll call them typically aldehydic end products, what I call advanced lipid oxidation end products, or ALES, ALES. And these ALES are things like 4-hydroxynonenal, which is 4-HNE, malondialdehyde, or MDA, 9 and 13-HODE, which is hydroxyoctadecadienoic acid, acrolein, and carboxyethylpyrrole. And these are just 5 representative examples that we know the most about of these advanced lipid oxidation end products, the ALES. And you can look at each one of these and they have extraordinarily toxic effects. And so the one that this question is coming from is acrolein. And it's been so long since I've looked at this, I can't remember exactly the amount, but the amount of acrolein toxin, which is the toxic aldehyde that comes from cigarette smoke, is also in vegetable oils. And they found, for example, that 154 grams of French fries, now they call them chips over there, but French fries gives you about 1 to 1.5 grams of acrolein, which is the equivalent of smoking, I think it was 18 to 26 average cigarettes, or up to about 80 cigarettes that are low in acrolein. So all cigarettes have acrolein. So in other words, when you eat French fries cooked in these oils, you're consuming these toxic aldehydes, and just one of those is acrolein. Now what happens is these are stored in our body fat, and you've got this constant source of, that's just one of the toxins. And this toxin can cause cancer, just like lung cancer. And, you may have heard, I heard this first from Tucker Goodrich. Tucker Goodrich and I have done extraordinarily similar research. I didn't know about him until about 1.5 years ago, but I heard his podcast, and he was talking about, one of the things I learned from Tucker was that in the 1980s, there was the Chinese had a high prevalence of lung cancer in women who had never smoked. It was like 80% of the women that had lung cancer had never smoked. And what they eventually tied it to is they were cooking with rapeseed oil. And rapeseed oil, not only are they consuming it, but it's one of these highly polyunsaturated oils, but in the vapors, acrolein comes out of that. And they're breathing it in as they cook. They do their wok cooking. And this was the connection they finally made. So the majority of women in China who have lung cancer never smoked. They're getting it from seed oils, just cooking alone, and then and then eating is going to add to that. But yes, I mean, I think that our little tiny babies, what they're doing is just the worst possible thing I can imagine. Is they're taking their formula and they literally remove the butter that's in those and put vegetable oils in instead. That is the worst possible thing you could ever do to your baby.
Yeah, I shudder when I read some of the ingredients, particularly on baby formula and looking at the baby food. It's just like you're just starting them out so far behind.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think I feed my kids, real normal food, lots of meat, eggs, dairy, some fruits and vegetables. And I mean, that's already a superpower. I mean, they're already head and shoulders above their peers just based on nutritional stats. Hey, let me ask you about, because you mentioned Tucker, and I've interviewed Tucker before about the seed oil stuff quite a while back. But, and one of the things he mentions is, he seems to think and notice that removing seed oils from the diet makes us more sun tolerant. We don't burn as easily. A lot of us have experienced that. I mean, I can be in the sun for 4 or 5 hours without my shirt on. I don't burn. Outside of maybe get a little pink the first day of the summer, but beyond that, I'm sitting there, I'm doing fine. What about with the eyes? Because we're told to wear these sun protective glasses all the time, and just in general with regard to eye health. I mean, my assumption is exercise would probably benefit eye health. Good sleep would probably benefit. But what are the things we can do? And can you comment on seed oils and eye health and what you can do besides eating a healthy ancestral diet? What else can we do to protect our eyes or help our eyes?
Yeah, and just so I've said it, Sean, I think that the most important thing that you can do, 99.6% or something of what you do for your eyes is the same as the rest of your body, and it's an ancestral diet. And there's a bunch of ways to go about those. And from my perspective, Sean, that could be low carb, it could be low fat, it could even be low protein. A carnivore diet is, it meets all of those needs, as I mean, it meets everything you need, just as an example. But as far as, to get back to the question, what else can we do for our eyes? I don't think there's, and all of the research will support this. And this is in my book, this will be in our next scientific paper, is there's hardly a shred of evidence any good evidence at all that sunlight is a factor in causing macular degeneration. In fact, it's just the opposite. More sun exposure, less macular degeneration. The people towards the equator have a lot less macular degeneration. And it's not just that it's, one of the big factors probably is driving vitamin D, but sunlight is extremely healthy. And we need to be in the sun. Exercise, yes. I'm convinced, although I work out like crazy, and this is one of the reasons I'm probably in this area is I've always been extremely interested in health and fitness. Exercise, yes. I mean, I think there was, several decades ago, there was a study that showed that exercise may be the most important thing of all in terms of preventing macular degeneration. But I believe, my overall impression is that one of the huge factors there really is the fact that people who exercise just eat healthier. Just like the fact that people who exercise don't tend to smoke. They don't go together. So no, I don't. So going back, I don't believe you need to protect your eyes from UV light. Of course, staring at the sun will, destroy the macula if you do that for very long, but that is completely, utterly different than just natural sunlight exposure. You need to eat an ancestral diet. You should exercise. Absolutely. Gosh, I don't know if I'm missing it. I think that's really that's the big picture.
Yeah, and again, that goes along with this common sense that what everyone says, and I certainly, I think we evolved in sunlight. I mean, sunlight is where all the energy comes from. To think that the sun is somehow killing us or damaging us, whether it's regard to skin cancer, eye health, or anything else, to me is bizarre. But we've kind of, maybe we sold more SPF 50 or something like that. Maybe the dermatologists are happy about that, perhaps. One last question from the audience here is, again, in reference to the Aquilin. Is there something you can do? Let's say you had a diet where you ate a bunch of garbage for a while. Is there anything you can do to expedite the removal of these toxic compounds other than just stop eating them? Is there anything else that can benefit that, or do you know of anything that shows that?
Well, I would say that I get a lot of the questions is, and we haven't had really time to go into it, but you even briefly already mentioned that these omega-6s, linoleic acid is the primary one, the 18 carbon omega-6 that accumulates in our fat, and it's a depot then for causing this pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, and toxic effects. So you're storing those, and in native traditional populations, the omega-6 linoleic acid in the adipose, that is the fat in their bodies, is in the 3 to 4% range. And in in Americans, as an example, as you know, Stefan Guillenet collated all that data, 37 studies that showed that the average omega-6 linoleic acid in Americans adipose was 9.1% in 1959 and was 21.5% by 2004. I think it was the year, might have been 2000. No, it was 2008. I think it was 21.5%. So we need to get our omega-6 down. The way to do that, number one, is from my perspective, easiest thing to do, eliminate all oils. That's the easiest thing to do. Cook your foods, make all your own foods, cook them in butter or a good quality pasture raised pork lard or beef tallow. Huge step right there. That'll fix 80% of your troubles. And then the second step would be, I say, get rid of, for the most part, nuts and seeds, because they're also high in omega-6. And if you have a lot of omega-6 in your body fat, you need to get your omega-6 as low as you can, under 2% of your total calories. And then your body fat's going to start, body fat omega-6 linoleic acid is going to start coming down. As far as the other things, I'm sure that exercise, fasting, intermittent fasting may contribute to that, but I can't prove that, but it just makes sense. People who, exercise, they're going to burn some of that omega-6 for fuel. And so that's going to help. So I think that this is another reason exercise is good.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned, that in 2008, 21% of our body fat contains these, omega-6, oils. It's probably more by 2020. It's probably up to 25% now. I wouldn't be surprised. And so the question is, let's say you do lose weight, you've got a lot of excess body fat and you start losing all this weight. Where did those omega-6 go? I mean, are they just being burned as fuel, combusted? Or are they circulating around, getting in our serum and going around wreaking havoc other places? There's this thought that when you start, sweating these things out or losing them somehow, they move around and can potentially cause issues. Is there any evidence that would support that?
As far as I know, I believe that the only way we're getting rid of them is we ultimately are going to have to burn them for fuel. And this is not what our body wants to do. It never was designed to be burning omega-6 linoleic acid for fuel. I think it's that's we were meant to consume like under around maybe a half to 1% of our diet as omega-6 and similar for omega-3, and so a very tiny amount, and that those fats would be used in our mitochondria and primarily. But anyway, I think that in order to get rid of them, I think we have to burn them. They're actually, some of them are going to be converted into those toxic aldehydes, and we're eventually those will be detoxified in the liver, and we pee them out eventually. But other than that, I think that's the only way to really get rid of them as far as I know. The half-life of linoleic acid, omega-6 linoleic acid in our bodies is 600 to 680 days. So you just round it off, it's about 2 years. And this is where I see that, so we've got this, and, most people have this huge reservoir of omega-6, and this is why you just can't get rid of that in 3 months or 6 months. Yes, you can make things a lot better in that period of time, and you can help many of these metabolic parameters in that period of time. And it could be drastic, but in terms of getting those numbers down, it may take a few years. And so people have to be patient, that it might take time, it just got to pay for our nutritional sins, right? And this is part of it.
Yeah, and the thing you point out, you said 660 some days is a half-life. So that's just to cut it in half. And there's another 666 days to bring it down to 25%. So it can take a long time. So that makes sense. So I'll tell you, Chris, this has been wonderful. We've kind of come to our hour time. I really appreciate this. And this has been fascinating. Hopefully we get you back on down the road a little bit, if that's okay with you. Where do people go to follow you, find out stuff, get some information from you, support you? I know you said you had a nonprofit. Can you give us that information?
Yes. So the nonprofit is Cure AMD Foundation, and that's at cureamd.org. We're totally a 501c3 nonprofit. Nobody in our organization gets paid. Our goal is to do research, and I'm going to be writing a book with Joe Mercola that'll hopefully come out this summer or later this year. Find me on YouTube. We haven't been very good at organizing all those presentations and videos and podcasts and things like this, but you can find me there. And that's basically it, Shawn. But thank you so much. Really, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Love your show. Likewise.
And thanks, Dr. Knobbe. You guys have a great day. We'll see many of you guys back tomorrow. If not, have a good weekend and take care. You're in Denver. So are you still in Colorado still?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Hopefully it's not too cold there.
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks, Shawn.
Right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.